The bourbon was his. He'd brought it himself. A bottle of Blanton's he kept in the cabinet above the refrigerator in our kitchen. The one Diana had cleared out specifically for him when we moved into the house 9 years ago. Gerald didn't drink much, but when he did, he drank well, and he had very clear opinions about whose bourbon was whose. I had learned early in the marriage not to touch that bottle. It sat up there like a small territorial flag, and I had always found this mildly funny. I wasn't finding anything funny that Saturday afternoon. He'd arrived at 2, ostensibly to drop off a birthday gift for Lily, whose party was the following weekend. Diana was out, a yoga class, she'd said, though the yoga class was a story I was already in the middle of revising. Lily was at a friend's house. It was just Gerald and me in the kitchen, which had never happened before in 14 years, and the specific quality of his composure when he sat down at the table told me he had chosen this. He poured 2 glasses without asking. Set one in front of me. Sit down, Marcus. I sat. Gerald was 72 years old and had practiced property law in Knoxville for 35 years before retiring. He had the bearing of a man accustomed to rooms where other people were uncomfortable, the kind of stillness that comes not from ease but from long practice at projecting control. I had never disliked him exactly. We had maintained, for 14 years, a relationship of mutual and courteous distance, the kind that exists between 2 people who have little in common except someone they both love, or believed they loved, or thought they understood. He looked at his glass for a moment. Then he looked at me. "She's going to leave you," he said. "I thought you should hear it from someone who'll say it plainly." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a lawnmower started up somewhere on the street. "Gerald, I'm not here to discuss it. I'm here to tell you." He picked up his glass, took a measured sip, set it down. "She's been unhappy for a long time. You may have known this and chosen not to see it, or you may have genuinely not known, and I don't particularly care which. But this marriage was a mistake from the beginning, and she should have ended it years ago, and the fact that she hasn't is her failure of nerve, not evidence of anything." I looked at him. I had known this man for 16 years, met him 2 years before Diana and I married, sat at his table for holidays and birthdays, watched him with Lily with the particular pride of a grandfather who doesn't soften himself for children but loves them with complete seriousness. I thought I understood him. The man sitting across from me now was familiar in face and voice and mannerism, and entirely foreign in every other way. "A mistake," I said. "From her side." "Yes. You're telling me my marriage was a mistake." "I'm telling you Diana has always believed it was." He said this without cruelty, which was somehow worse than cruelty would have been. Just a fact being delivered to its rightful recipient. "She married you because she was 37 and afraid, and you were steady and kind and available. Those are not bad qualities, Marcus. They are simply not sufficient reasons to build a life on. My name is Marcus. I'm 44 years old. I teach history at a public high school in Knoxville, the same school I've taught at for 16 years, a job I came to because I loved it and stayed in because it turned out I was good at it and because the rhythms of it suited me. I am, by most measures, a steady man. I show up. I prepare. I am not exciting in the ways that get described in songs, but I had believed, for 14 years, that what Diana and I had was real and solid and mutual. Gerald was telling me it was one-sided. Had always been. "Why are you telling me this?" I said. He looked at his glass again. A long pause, the considered pause of a man choosing his words not for kindness but for precision. "Because she won't. She'll let it happen around you rather than to you, and you'll find out in the worst possible way, and whatever small dignity the situation allows you will be gone." He looked up. "I have not agreed with how she's handled this. I have not agreed with some of what she's done. But she is my daughter, and I'm not going to manage her life for her. What I can do is give you the information you're owed." "What has she done, Gerald?" A silence. "That," he said, "you'll have to find yourself." He finished his bourbon, set the glass on the table with the careful precision of a man who has said exactly what he came to say, and stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He had worn a jacket to come and tell me my marriage was a lie, which felt like the most Gerald thing I had ever witnessed. "The bottle stays," he said. "I'll collect it another time." He let himself out. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The lawnmower outside had stopped. The bourbon Gerald had poured for me sat untouched. Through the kitchen window, the afternoon light was doing something golden and unhurried across the yard, the kind of light that has no interest in what's happening inside the house. I had been married for 14 years. I had a daughter named Lily who was 11 and brilliant and currently at her friend's house drawing horses with wings, which she had been drawing since she was 4 and had recently begun naming. I taught the Civil War and the Reconstruction to 16-year-olds 5 days a week and did it with genuine enthusiasm. I had believed my life was, if not exceptional, deeply and honestly mine. Gerald had just suggested that the central fact of it had been a performance I wasn't in on. I picked up the bourbon and drank it. Then I started thinking. I am a historian by training and temperament, which means I understand, better than most, that the past is not fixed. What happened is fixed. Events occurred. Words were said. Choices were made. But the meaning of those events shifts constantly as new information arrives. The same facts, seen through a different frame, become an entirely different story. Gerald had handed me a new frame. The question was what it would show me when I held it up to the last 14 years. Diana and I had met at a mutual friend's dinner party. She'd been 35 then. I'd been 30. She was a graphic designer, worked for a mid-sized firm downtown, had a particular way of seeing the visual world that I'd always found genuinely interesting. She could walk into a room and tell you in 2 sentences what was wrong with the light and exactly how to fix it. We'd talked most of the evening. We dated for 2 years and married in a small ceremony with about 60 people, none of whom, I now recalled, had been Gerald's preferred guest list. He had wanted a larger wedding, a more formal one. Diana had overridden him on this. I had thought, at the time, that this showed an admirable independence from her father's expectations. I thought about that now with different eyes. The first few years of the marriage had been good, genuinely good, not just in the way that early years are good before things go wrong. We'd bought the house. Lily had arrived 2 years in, a fact that had rearranged everything in the way that children rearrange everything. Completely, irreversibly, and largely for the better. Diana had shifted from full-time to freelance when Lily was small, which had been her choice and which had worked well. Our life had a shape and the shape had felt right. The trouble, such as it was, had been gradual. The distance, not hostile, not cold, just the particular quality of 2 people sharing a life rather than building one together. Diana's creativity had always been internal, turned inward. She could spend entire evenings at her desk working on something without needing conversation, and I had learned to read this as absorption rather than withdrawal. The evenings I spent marking papers or reading while she worked were evenings I had framed as comfortable companionship. Gerald's words reframed them as parallel solitudes. I thought about the last 2 years specifically. Diana had started going to yoga roughly 18 months ago, the same yoga as cover story I'd seen deployed before, and which I now recognized with a tired familiarity. But it wasn't just the yoga. There had been a series of small changes in the texture of her attention. The way she was present at dinner but not quite there. The way she laughed at Lily's jokes with warmth but looked at me with something that, examined now, I could only call assessment. The way a person looks at a situation they're calculating how to exit. The name Victor had come up perhaps 3 times. A client of Diana's, a small architecture firm she'd been doing brand work for. She'd mentioned him in the context of a project that was taking longer than expected, a redesign of their visual identity that had required several rounds of revision. I'd registered the name the way you register names that arrive in professional context. Adequately, without retention. Victor. I wrote the name on the inside of my mind and kept it there. On Sunday, the day after Gerald's visit, I went through 14 years of our shared life with the systematic attention of a man preparing a historical assessment. Not looking for evidence yet, just looking. Re-examining the record with new awareness. What I found, or rather what I began to find, was not dramatic. No hidden objects, no obvious lies. What I found was a pattern of small emotional withdrawals, moments where Diana had been present in body and absent in engagement, and where I had, consistently and apparently reliably, interpreted this as her natural introversion rather than as detachment. I had been, for some years, the husband of a woman who was elsewhere. I had simply been too busy inhabiting my own reading of our life to notice. On Monday, I went to school and taught 3 classes about Reconstruction-era politics and helped 2 students with research questions after the final bell. In the parking lot afterward, I sat in my car and called my oldest friend, a man named Joel who taught biology at the same school and who had known me since graduate school and had the specific gift of telling me difficult things without being brutal about them. "I need to talk," I said. "Tonight, if you can. Come over at 7. I'll tell Karen it's papers." Joel's kitchen, 7:15. 2 beers on the table. I told him everything. Gerald's visit, the words, the bourbon, the 14 years rearranged in a single afternoon. Joel listened without interrupting, which was his habit and one of his best qualities. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Do you believe him?" "I don't know yet, but I can't unhear it." "No." He turned his beer slowly. "What are you going to do?" "Find out if it's true," I said. "All of it, before I do anything else." "And if it is?" I looked at the kitchen wall. Joel and Karen's kitchen was warm and slightly cluttered in the way of houses where people actually lived rather than maintained appearances. There was a child's drawing on the refrigerator, their youngest 8 years old, an elaborate crayon landscape. "Then I'll know," I said, "and I'll decide from there." What I didn't tell Joel, what I was only beginning to articulate to myself, was that Gerald's visit had done something more disorienting than reveal a possible betrayal. It had raised a question I hadn't previously needed to ask: whether Diana had ever, in 14 years, chosen me fully. Whether the life I'd been living had been real or whether it had been, as Gerald said with his attorney's precision, a mistake she'd simply lacked the nerve to correct. That was the question that kept me awake until 2 in the morning. Not is she cheating, that felt almost secondary now. The deeper question was any of it true? I did not hire anyone. Not yet. What I did first was pay a different quality of attention to my own life. The deliberate, systematic attention I brought to historical research, which is fundamentally the skill of distinguishing between primary sources and interpretations, between what actually happened and what people chose to record. Diana's patterns. She worked from home 3 days a week and went to her downtown studio on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The yoga was Monday and Friday evenings, 6 to 7:30. She was, on the surface, entirely accountable. Everything had a name and a location and a time. Too accountable, perhaps. The schedules of people with nothing to hide tend to be slightly irregular. They stay late, they change plans, they forget things. Diana's schedule had acquired, over the past year or so, a smoothness that I recognized now as construction. Every evening had a reason. Every absence had an explanation offered slightly before it was needed. The Tuesday studio visits had been increasing. 6 months ago, she went once a week. Now it was every Tuesday without exception, sometimes extending to early evening. She mentioned Victor in connection with these visits occasionally, the architecture firm project, revisions, a presentation she was preparing. The professional framing was thorough. Too thorough. I drove past her studio on a Tuesday evening at 6:45, not stopping, just noting. Her car was there. The studio lights were on. Nothing visible through the window from the street. I drove home and felt slightly ashamed of myself, then felt less ashamed when I remembered Gerald's face at my kitchen table and the precision with which he'd said a mistake from the beginning. I found Victor online without difficulty. He was a partner at the architecture firm, 46 years old. His photo on the firm's website showing a lean man with dark hair and the kind of face that suggested confidence in its own aesthetic. The firm's website also listed several recent projects, one of which was a brand redesign. Diana's project. I recognized the visual language. The professional overlap was real. That was the red herring I had to account for. The possibility that Victor was exactly what Diana said he was, a client, and that Gerald's visit was the action of a complicated old man settling some private score I didn't understand. This possibility deserved honest consideration. I gave it 3 days of honest consideration and found it increasingly inadequate. On Thursday, I came home from school at 4:30 to find Diana already back from the studio, earlier than usual, which itself was unusual. She was in the kitchen making tea, still in her work clothes, and there was something in the set of her shoulders that I recognized as post-resolution. The particular physical ease of someone who has just handled something, made a decision or received one. "You're home early," I said. "Wrapped up earlier than I thought." She poured her tea. "How were the kids today?" "Restless. Pre-weekend energy." She nodded. She did not ask a follow-up question, which was also unusual. Diana had always been genuinely interested in the anecdotes from my classroom. She'd been good with teenagers, understood them, found them interesting. The absence of the follow-up question was small. It was also the 43rd small thing in 3 weeks. That evening, after Lily was in bed and Diana was in her studio working, I sat in the living room and thought carefully about the red herrings I'd been navigating. The possibility that Victor was innocent. The possibility that Gerald's motivation was something other than honesty. Some private conflict with Diana I wasn't aware of. Some old grievance being settled through me. Gerald was not a simple man. He was also not, in my experience, a manipulative one. He had struck me always as a person who said exactly what he meant and nothing he didn't. But I needed more than Gerald's word and my own pattern recognition. I called Joel the next morning. "I need someone," I said. "Someone who does this professionally." Joel was quiet for a moment. "I know someone. A guy named Ray. He does insurance investigations mostly, but he handles personal cases. He's in Chattanooga, but he covers East Tennessee." A pause. "Marcus, are you sure?" "I'm sure I need to know," I said. "Whether I'm sure about what I'm going to find is a different question." Ray was businesslike on the phone. He asked for Diana's schedule, her car, Victor's name and workplace, and told me he'd need 2 weeks for anything reliable. I gave him everything he asked for and tried not to think too carefully about what 2 weeks of another person watching my wife's movements would look like if the whole thing turned out to be Gerald's private war. In the meantime, Lily's birthday party happened. 11 candles. A chocolate cake Diana had made from scratch, which was one of her gifts. She baked beautifully and did it rarely enough that it felt like an event. Gerald came, as he always did for Lily's birthdays. He and I did not speak about the previous Saturday. We were, to all appearances, exactly as we had always been. Cordial, slightly formal, united in our attention to Lily. At one point during the party, while Diana was inside refilling the lemonade pitcher, Gerald came and stood beside me near the garden fence. He didn't look at me. He watched Lily open a present with the focused joy of a child who is fully present in every good moment. "She's remarkable," he said quietly. "She is," I agreed. A pause. "I meant what I said," he said, still not looking at me. "All of it." "I know," I said. We stood in the afternoon light and watched Lily hold up a book about marine biology and announce it was exactly what she'd wanted. And neither of us said anything else. Ray called on a Thursday morning, 15 days after I'd hired him. He had a document and 2 photographs. He emailed the document and asked if I wanted to meet for the photographs. I said yes. We met at a diner off I-40. Ray was a compact, unremarkable man in his 50s who had the practiced neutrality of someone who spent his professional life delivering information people had paid for and didn't want. He slid a manila envelope across the table. "Tuesday evenings," he said. 4 of them over the past month. "Your wife's car was parked outside a residential building on Laurel Avenue for between 90 minutes and 2.5 hours on each occasion. The building is Victor's residence." He paused. "The photographs show her entering and leaving the building on 2 separate Tuesdays. Clear images. Timestamps." I looked at the photographs. Diana in her studio clothes going through a glass door. Diana coming out 40 minutes later by the timestamp, her jacket over her arm, her hair slightly different from how it had been when she went in. "How long?" I said. "Based on the pattern, at minimum 4 to 6 months. Possibly longer. I can't establish an earlier timeline without more time and more resources." I nodded. I put the photographs back in the envelope. The diner around me had the specific quality of an ordinary Tuesday morning. Coffee, conversation, the sound of plates. The unremarkable texture of a world that was continuing exactly as before. "Thank you," I said. "I'm sorry," Ray said. He said it the way people say it when they mean it and know it doesn't help. I drove to school and taught 2 classes. During my free period I sat in my classroom, the room I'd spent 16 years in, the room where I taught the same 4 walls of history to several generations of teenagers and found something new in it every year, and I took out the manila envelope and looked at the photographs again. Then I put them away and thought about Gerald. Specifically, I thought about one thing Gerald had said that I'd been turning over since the Saturday of his visit. I have not agreed with some of what she's done. Not the affair specifically, he hadn't named the affair. But the phrasing suggested he knew more than he'd said. That he was aware of specific actions, not just general unhappiness. Which meant Gerald had known. For some period of time, possibly a significant one. He had known that his daughter was conducting an affair, and he had said nothing to me until that Saturday. He had chosen the moment of his disclosure, which meant he had made a series of prior decisions not to disclose. Why now? What had changed? I spent 3 days with that question. Then, on a Sunday afternoon when Diana had taken Lily to her mother's for the day, Gerald was traveling and wouldn't be there. I drove to Gerald's house in West Knoxville and knocked on the door. He opened it, looked at me, and stepped aside. We sat in his study, which smelled of old books and the faint ghost of pipe tobacco from decades past, and I put Ray's photographs on the desk between us and watched his face. He looked at them. His expression didn't change. "How long have you known?" I said. A pause. 7 months. "And you waited until last month to tell me?" "Yes." "Why?" He looked at the photographs rather than at me. A long silence. Not the comfortable silences of a man organizing his thoughts, but the difficult silence of one choosing how much of the truth to give. "Diana came to me in February," he said. "She told me she was considering ending the marriage. She asked for my advice." He paused. "I told her she had an obligation to tell you directly, that she owed you an honest conversation, not a managed exit." Another pause. She disagreed. She felt that the situation would resolve itself. "Resolve itself," I repeated. "She believed." He stopped. Started again. "Diana has always handled difficulty by waiting for circumstances to make the decision for her. It is a trait I failed to correct in her when she was young, and I have watched it cause damage throughout her adult life." He looked at me finally. "When she didn't act on what she'd told me, I gave her 3 months. Then I came to you. You came to give me time to prepare." "Yes." "Not to expose her. To give me a head start." "Yes." I sat with this. The study was quiet. Through the window, Gerald's garden was doing its late summer thing. Roses past their peak, the lawn slightly overgrown in the corners, the specific comfortable neglect of a garden whose owner has other concerns. "There's something you're not telling me," I said. The silence this time was different. Something shifted in his posture, subtle, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't watching carefully. "Gerald." He picked up the photographs and looked at them again. Set them down. "Victor is not a stranger to this family," he said carefully. "He and Diana knew each other before you did. Before she met you." I was very still. "How long before?" "They were together for 2 years. She ended it when she was 34. He paused. "She ended it because I told her he was not a stable person. That he had financial problems he wasn't disclosing and a pattern of behavior with women that concerned me." He looked at the photographs. "I was right about the finances. I may have been wrong about the rest." The room rearranged itself around me. Not a client. Not a new person who had wandered into Diana's professional life. Someone from before. Someone she had left or been persuaded to leave, and had apparently never fully left behind. The architecture firm brand project. I wondered now whether that had been coincidence or whether Diana had sought him out. Whether the professional overlap was a door she had opened deliberately. "Does she know you told me?" I said. "No." "Are you going to tell her?" He looked at me. "That depends on what you do next." I picked up the photographs and put them back in the envelope. I stood up. Gerald remained seated, which was unlike him. He always stood when someone left a room. That he didn't now told me something about the weight he was sitting with. "Thank you," I said. For the second time in a month, I was thanking a man for information I hadn't wanted. "Marcus." His voice stopped me at the door. I turned. He was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before. Not remorse exactly, but the specific gravity of someone who understands that they have been, in their way, a participant in a damage they are only now trying to partially repair. "She is my daughter and I love her. That is not in question. But what she has done, the length of it, the management of it, was wrong. You deserved better than this. I nodded. I left. In the car, I sat for a while before starting the engine. The street outside Gerald's house was quiet, the kind of quiet that belongs to Sunday afternoons in established neighborhoods. A man walking a dog. 2 kids on bicycles. The ordinary world going about its business. 14 years. And before that, Victor. And Gerald knowing and choosing and finally deciding that I was owed something. I started the engine and drove home to wait for Diana to return. Diana and Lily came home at 5. Lily was carrying a small stuffed sea turtle that Gerald's wife had apparently given her, and she narrated the entire afternoon's events in the compressed, enthusiastic style of a child who experiences time differently and needs to transmit it all at once. I listened and asked questions and made the appropriate responses, and when she ran upstairs to put the sea turtle in what she called its habitat, an arrangement of objects on her bookshelf, Diana and I were alone in the kitchen. She was putting her bag down, her back to me. I put Ray's envelope on the kitchen island. She turned, saw it, went still. The specific stillness I had seen once before. The Thursday afternoon when she'd come home early, the post-resolution ease, but reversed. This was the stillness of a person who has been building toward something and has just found that the other party arrived first. She looked at the envelope, then at me. "Open it," I said. She didn't move for a moment. Then she crossed to the island, opened the envelope, looked at the photographs. Her face was controlled in a way that told me the control was costing her something. "How long have you known?" she said. 3 weeks since your father told me. 2 weeks since I confirmed it." Her head came up. "My father. He came here the Saturday you went to yoga. 3 weeks ago. He sat at this table and told me the marriage was a mistake and that you were planning to leave." I kept my voice level. "He didn't tell me about Victor specifically. I found that myself." Something moved through her expression. Not anger, not guilt. Something more complicated. "He had no right. He had every right. More right than you've given me." I paused. "Diana, Victor was before me. You ended it with him or were encouraged to end it, and then you married me, and then somewhere in the last year you went back to him. I need to understand what that means." She put the photographs back in the envelope with careful hands. "What do you want me to say? I want you to tell me whether your father was right. Whether you married me because you were afraid and I was available." A very long pause. The kitchen was warm from the afternoon sun, and upstairs I could hear Lily arranging things on her shelf, talking quietly to herself in the way she did when she was absorbed in something. "Not only that," Diana said finally. "I want to be honest with you. Not only that. But partly." She looked at her hands. "I was 37. I had just ended something difficult. You were—" She stopped. "You were exactly what felt safe. And I don't mean that as an insult, Marcus. I mean that safety felt like the right thing to choose at the time. But not enough. Not forever," she said quietly. "I kept waiting for it to become enough. And Victor." Another pause. "He contacted me 14 months ago. A professional inquiry. It was real, the project was real. But I knew when I said yes that it wasn't only professional." She looked up. "I'm not going to tell you I didn't know what I was doing. I knew." 14 months, I said. "Yes." I thought about 14 months. About the evenings I'd read beside a woman who was conducting a parallel life. About all the small calibrations she'd made to keep it manageable, and all the explanations that had been adequate because I had chosen, as Gerald said, one way or another, not to see. "What were you planning to do?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. And then, more quietly, "That's the honest answer. I kept not deciding. Like you've always done." She flinched. "Yes. Your father said that. Not in those words, but that's what he meant. My father had no right." "Diana." My voice was still level, still controlled. "Your father came to this house and told me the truth because you wouldn't. Whatever his reasons, whatever his relationship with you or Victor or any of the history I apparently didn't know. He told me the truth. You had 14 months. She said nothing. Upstairs, Lily called down. "Dad, can you come see how I arranged it?" I looked at Diana. She was looking at the envelope on the counter, her hands still, her expression stripped of the management that had been in place for so long it had become invisible to me. "I'm going to go see the sea turtle," I said. I went upstairs. Lily had arranged her bookshelf with the sea turtle at the center of a small ecosystem of objects. Pebbles, a feather, a library book about oceans. She explained the arrangement with the seriousness of someone who has thought it through. "It needs to feel like it belongs somewhere," she said. "It looks like it does," I said. I sat on the edge of her bed for a while. She talked about the sea turtle, and then about a book she was reading, and then about a girl at school who had said something unkind, and then about what she wanted for breakfast tomorrow. I listened to all of it with the complete attention of a man who understood, sitting in his daughter's room, that this was what was real. This was what had been real all along, regardless of everything else. When I went back downstairs, Diana was still in the kitchen. She had poured herself a glass of water and was standing at the window. She turned when I came in. "I'm going to call a lawyer tomorrow," I said. "I think you should do the same." She nodded. She had known this was coming. She had known for longer than today. "Lily," she said, "we'll figure it out together. That part doesn't change." She nodded again. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying, which was its own kind of dignity. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know that's inadequate." "It is," I said. "But I believe you." The divorce was finalized 10 months later. It was, by the standards of these things, civilized, the word my lawyer used with a slight tone of professional surprise, as though civilized was the exception rather than the rule. We sold the house. We divided the equity fairly. We worked out a custody arrangement for Lily that put her needs above every other consideration, which required 3 difficult conversations but no fighting, because Diana and I had always agreed about Lily even when we had agreed about little else. Diana moved to a smaller house 3 miles away, close enough for Lily's school to stay the same, for the handoffs to be manageable, for the ordinary logistics of a shared child's life to function without drama. Victor, as far as I could tell, was not part of her new life. I didn't ask and she didn't offer. What she did with her rebuilt life was no longer my concern. Gerald called me once, about 6 weeks after the divorce was final. He said very little. Checked on Lily, asked how I was managing, and before he hung up said, with the same precision he brought to everything, "You handled it well." That was all. I thought about that phrase for a while. Handled it well. The assessment of a man who had watched the process from a complicated position, the person who had set it in motion, who had calculated that I was owed the information and delivered it at the moment of his own choosing, who had his own history with Victor and his own accounting of what had gone wrong between his daughter and a man she'd been persuaded to leave. Gerald was not a simple person. What he'd done had been, in its way, a kindness, or at least had been intended as one. I chose to receive it as such. Joel came over for dinner on a Friday in March, 7 months after the divorce. He brought wine. We sat in the apartment I'd rented, a place I'd chosen for myself, quiet street, good light in the morning, close to school, and he asked how I was doing in the way that meant he actually wanted to know. "Better," I said. "Not performed better. Actually better. You seem it." "I've been thinking about the history of it," I said. "Not obsessively, but the way you think about a period when you're trying to understand the cause and effect." I poured more wine. I was a safe choice for a woman who needed to feel safe. I was never a passionate one. I think I knew that somewhere. I chose not to examine it. Because the life was good. Because the life was good, I agreed. And Lily was real, and the house was real, and the classroom was real. I let those things be enough. Were they wrong to be enough? I thought about it. No. But I should have been more honest with myself about the shape of what I had. Joel nodded. He didn't offer a resolution, which was the right response. A woman named Caroline appeared in my life about a year after the divorce. A colleague of Joel's wife, a pediatric nurse, 42 years old, someone who had been through her own hard thing and had come out of it with a very clear sense of what she wanted and what she didn't. We took it slowly, deliberately, with the particular care of 2 people who understand, from experience, the cost of not paying attention. On a Sunday morning about 8 months into knowing her, we were having coffee at her kitchen table. She was reading something. I was marking papers. Lily was coming over that afternoon. Caroline looked up and said, "You're very quiet." Marking, I said. You're marking and also thinking about something. I looked at her. She was right. I had been thinking about Gerald, as I did occasionally. About the afternoon he'd sat at my kitchen table with his bourbon and delivered 14 years of rearranged history in 6 sentences. About the strange, cold kindness of what he'd done. Someone did me a painful favor once, I said. I've been deciding for a long time whether I'm grateful. And, yes, I said. I think yes. She held my look for a moment. The calm, direct look of someone who doesn't require the full story and knows that's not what's being offered. Then she went back to her reading. Outside the window, the March light was doing something clean and unhurried. Lily would be here in 3 hours. I had papers to finish. I picked up my pen and went back to work. The most unusual thing about this story is that the betrayal is delivered not by evidence, not by accident, but by the betrayed person's own father-in-law. A man who sat at Marcus's kitchen table and told him the truth because his daughter wouldn't. This is what makes the psychological machinery of the story so distinctive. The catalyst is not a discovery but a gift of information, given by a complicated man with his own history and his own reasons, and the story is really about what Marcus does with that gift. Gerald is the character the story turns on, and understanding him requires holding 2 things simultaneously. He loved his daughter, that was never in question. He also had a clear-eyed and unsentimental view of her character flaws, one of which was her lifelong habit of waiting for circumstances to make decisions for her. His visit to Marcus wasn't primarily an act of loyalty to his son-in-law. It was the act of a man who had watched his daughter mishandle a human being and had decided, after 7 months of waiting for her to correct it herself, that the waiting was over. Gerald's intervention was moral, but it was also controlling. He chose the timing, the framing, the amount of information to give. He managed the disclosure the same way Diana managed the affair. Carefully, with judgment about what the recipient could handle. The red flags, examined now, form a damning sequence. Diana's Tuesday studio schedule becoming fixed and extended. The professional framing of Victor's name, offered just often enough to establish a narrative, never enough to invite questions. The post-resolution ease Marcus noticed on the Thursday she came home early, which he registered but didn't interrogate. Each of these was individually explainable. Together, they describe a woman maintaining a parallel life with the competence of someone who had been doing it for over a year. The revelation that Victor predated Marcus, that Diana had been with him before, had been persuaded to end it by Gerald, and had apparently never resolved whatever that ending left unfinished, reframes the entire story. The marriage wasn't undermined by a new attraction. It was undermined by an old one that had been suppressed rather than resolved. Diana had married Marcus in the wake of ending something she hadn't fully chosen to end, and the marriage had been, from the first day, built on the foundation of an incomplete grief. Would the marriage have been different if Gerald had not intervened in Diana's previous relationship? That is the question the story leaves deliberately unanswered, and it is the right question to leave open, because it resists the comfort of a single villain. The deepest lesson here is about the difference between safety and choice. Diana chose Marcus because he felt safe. Marcus accepted being chosen without examining whether the choice was full. Both of them were, in different ways, settling. Diana for stability she hoped would become love. Marcus for a life he recognized as good without asking whether it was mutual. Genuine partnership requires 2 people who have chosen each other completely, not one person who chose and one person who accepted being chosen. This story is ultimately about the cost of indirect communication, and how the people we love can damage us most not through cruelty but through silence. Diana never lied to Marcus dramatically. She managed information. She let the marriage continue while conducting a separate life, telling herself the situation would resolve without requiring her to do the painful thing and speak directly. Gerald knew about Victor for 7 months before he intervened. In both cases, someone possessed the truth and held it, believing they were managing a situation rather than participating in its damage. What the story reveals at its deepest level is that self-deception rarely operates alone. It builds infrastructure. Diana needed the yoga schedule, the professional framing, the client narrative. Her ability to maintain this for 14 months tells us something about how thoroughly she had organized her internal story. She wasn't hiding from herself, she was managing competing truths in parallel, which is psychologically more sophisticated and ultimately more corrosive than simple dishonesty. Marcus's growth is quiet but real. He ends the story not angry, not bitter, but in possession of a clearer self-understanding than he had before. The marriage had been built on incomplete foundations, and his willingness to acknowledge his own role in that, to see that he had accepted being a safe choice without examining it, represents genuine emotional work. Not every loss produces that kind of clarity. This one did. What I keep thinking about is Gerald, a man who spent 7 months knowing the truth, watching his daughter manage someone else's life, and finally deciding that enough was enough. He did the right thing. He also did it in the most controlled, lawyerly, characteristically Gerald way possible. He gave Marcus information, but not all of it. He delivered a verdict but withheld the full case file. And yet, without Gerald, Marcus might have spent another year, 2 years, inside a life that had already quietly ended. Sometimes the most important thing someone can do for you is tell you the truth you weren't going to find yourself. The harder question isn't whether Gerald was right to speak. It's why Diana never did.